So I had not intended to intervene in any debate, but I was doing physiotherapy just now and reading the newspapers, and I thought I should bring the House back to earth. Mr. Rajaratnam had great virtues in the midst of despondency after a series of race riots when we were thrown out to independence, and our Malays in Singapore were apprehensive that now that we were the majority, we will in turn treat them the way they would treat, a Malay majority treated us. He drafted these words and rose above the present. He was a great idealist. It came to me, I trimmed out the unachievable, and the pledge as it stands is his work after I've trimmed it. What is it? An ideology? No. It's an aspiration. Will we achieve it? I do not know. We'll have to keep on trying. Are we a nation? In transition. I want to move an amendment to this amendment that acknowledges the progress that Singapore has made in the 50 years since it attained self-government in 1959 in nation building and achieving the aspirations and tenets. The aspirations, these were aspirations. This was not an ideology.
Can I have a copy of the amendment? Yeah. Okay.
So I'll sit down first and give you that.
Thank you. Well, it seems to be in order.
So, reference was made to the Constitution. The Constitution of Singapore enjoins us to especially look after the position of the Malays and other minorities. It comes under Article 152, 153. I'll read it. Minorities and special position of Malays. It shall be the responsibility of the government constantly to care for the interests of the racial and religious minorities in Singapore. The government shall exercise its functions in such a manner as to recognize the special position of the Malays, who are the indigenous people of Singapore, and accordingly it should be the responsibility of the government to protect, safeguard, support, foster, promote their political, educational, religious, economic, social, and cultural interests of the Malay language. And Muslim religion 153, the legislature shall by law make provision for regulating Muslim religious affairs and for constituting a council to advise the President in matters of the Muslim religion. We expressly state in our Constitution a duty on behalf of the government not to treat everybody as equal. It's not reality, it's not practical. It will lead to grave and irreparable damage if we work on that principle. So this was an aspiration. As Malays have progressed, and the numbers have joined the middle class with university degrees and professional qualifications, we have asked Andaki to ask them to agree not to have their special rights of free education at university, but to take what they were entitled to put those fees to help more disadvantaged Malays. So we are trying to reach a position where there is a level playing field for everybody. But it's going to take decades, if not centuries, and we may never get there. Now let me read the American Constitution. In its Declaration of Independence on the 4th of July 1977, adopted in Congress, the Declaration read in the second paragraph, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." That's 1976. 1976. Sorry, I beg your pardon. The Constitution, passed a few years later, says, "We, the people of the United States," this is the preamble, "in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings and liberties to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States." Nowhere does it say that the blacks would be differently treated. But the blacks did not get the vote until the civil rights movements in the 1960s with Martin Luther King and his famous speech, "We Dare to Dream." And enormous riots took place, and eventually President Johnson passed the Civil Rights Act. And it took many, many more decades before the southern states, which kept the blacks in their position, allowed the registration of black voters, and subsequently, even after that, to allow black students to go into white schools. Voters, and subsequently, even after that, to allow black students to go into white schools. It's 250 years before an exceptional half-black American became president. So, my colleague has put it, square pegs trying to be put into round holes. Will we ever make the pegs the same? No. You suggest to the Malay that we should abolish these provisions in the Constitution, and you will have grave disquiet. So we start on the basis that this is reality, that we will not be able to get a Chinese minister or an Indian minister to persuade Malay parents to look after their daughters more carefully and not have teenage pregnancies, which leads to failed marriages. Subsequent marriages also fail and delinquents. Can a Chinese MP or an Indian MP do that? You are interfering with my private life. But we have funded Mendaki and Moyes, and they've got a committee to try and reduce the numbers of such unhappy outcomes. So the way Singapore has made its progress is by a realistic step-by-step forward. And it may take us centuries before we get to a similar position as the Americans. They go to wars, the blacks and the whites. In the First World War, they did not carry arms. They carried the ammo. They were not given the honor to fight. In the Second World War, they went back. They were ex-GIs. Yes, those who could make it to university were given the GI grants, but they went back to the black ghettos, 1945, and they stayed there. And today, they're still black ghettos. These are realities. And the American Constitution does not say that you will treat blacks differently. But our Constitution spells out the duty of the government to treat Malays and other minorities with extra care. So the basis on which the nominated member has placed his arguments is false and flawed. It's completely untrue. It's got no basis whatsoever. And I thought to myself, perhaps I should bring this House back to earth and remind everybody what is our starting point, what is our base, and if we don't recognize where we started from and that these are our foundations, we will fail. So nobody can speak with I wouldn't say authority, with the knowledge that I have, because I knew the circumstances in which that pledge was made. And I admired the sentiments, Mr. Raja. I could not have, at that moment in 1965, my worry was what would the Malays in Singapore do now that they knew they were a minority and that we would wreak havoc with them as we were made to suffer when we were a minority. And when I returned on the 9th of August, on the advice of our special branch, I did not go back to my house. I stayed at Temasek, which was my official residence, and stayed there for 1 week. Then I went to Changi Cottage and stayed there for 2 months to make sure that everything subsides. These are realities. Today, 44 years later, we have a Malay community, I believe, at peace, convinced that we are not discriminating against them, convinced that we are including them in our society. The member works in Cinder. I'm told he's been there for 10 years. He will know Indians are not equal. There are those, for Brahmins, they will not be in Cinder. It is the non-Brahmins who are in Cinder. So I think it was dangerous to allow such highfalutin ideas to go undemolished and mislead Singapore. We are here today. We have this building. We have all these facilities. All around us is evidence of our accountability. Without being accountable, we would not have been re-elected, and there would have been no Singapore of today. So I beg to move.